Hi guys, favourite armoured penguin again, and I told you the next one would be a little bit quicker than the last one. So today what we're going to be looking at is another Jeranism video, and this time it's on the speed of light. I know this is quite old, this is all over a year old now, but we're going to talk about it because of all the debunking videos I've seen, none of them have actually gone into a little phenomena that I think even Jeranism would find it hard to disagree with. So let's get on with it.
I bring you the speed of light debunked. And now, this is just a thought experiment, but after this, if you still believe nothing can move faster than the speed of light, well, then enjoy your magical fantasy world built by mathematicians around theoretical nonsense.
Now the problem is, Jeranism, is that thought experiments can take almost anything into account. We can have thought experiments about travelling faster than the speed of light, of course we can. But we can also have thought experiments about going back in time. We can think about, for instance, the grandfather paradox. I mean, I cannot go back in time and kill my grandfather before my father was born. You see what I mean? But we can certainly think about it.
And remember, the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. It can be counterintuitive and against all your senses because, well, Neil deGrasse said so. And he knows all about the universe because, he read it in a book.
The problem with intuition isn't that it doesn't fit with the world. The problem with intuition is that it is individual to every single different person based on their experiences with life. You see, for me, driving has always been intuitive, and the first time I got myself into a skid, I turned out of it. But I know for a fact that other people have the opposite instinct, and a lot of people turn into the skid and end up getting themselves into all sorts of problems because of it. What it means is that they're very different, and they are based on our experiences up until that point. You see, I had a lot of experience in driving vehicles before I learned to drive, driving things like forklifts and even racing for a short while before I was legally allowed to drive. So my experiences had led me to the knowledge that actually cars are better off when the wheels are moving in the same direction the vehicle is.
So let's begin with the Earth. And on the Earth, we place a guy. And away from the Earth, somewhere distant, we put the planet Venus. Now we're told that that is about 25 million miles from the Earth at its closest. Now on Venus we place another guy, let's just pretend. And he's there, and between them two, you give them a solid pole or a solid stick. Now such a rod may not exist, but neither can a cannon shoot a cannonball around the Earth, so we're doing a thought experiment here. And so if the person on the Earth pulled the stick, it would take 2 minutes for the guy on Venus to feel it?
Yeah, it'd take 2 minutes for the guy on Venus to feel it. I'm sure you wouldn't disagree that if you took that same rod and tapped one end of it, that the other end wouldn't immediately vibrate because you've tapped. This is exactly the same thing. What you're talking about is a compression wave running all the way down that pole. Now, depending on what that pole is made of, that compression wave will move at different speeds. But if you say, for example, that you're dealing with a wooden pole, then that compression wave will actually move very, very slowly. It won't be 2 minutes. It will actually be probably more like hours before it reaches there. If we turn that pole, however, into something a little bit denser, a little bit more rigid, shall we say, then yes, it will propagate a lot quicker. We're probably talking about 12-15 minutes. If the entire pole was a single subatomic particle, now, because this is a thought experiment, we can do this. If that entire pole was a single subatomic particle, something that we have no reason to believe aren't entirely rigid, then you might possibly be onto something. But the fact is that it would no longer be a subatomic particle if it was that big. So no. 2 minutes is the absolute limit to the shortest time that signal, that shove, that tap, whatever you want to call it, would take to reach that point. And we can tell that this is indeed the case because we can actually do the same thing with the Earth. We can watch as seismic waves pass across the world. I believe you live in California, and I'm sure you've seen earthquakes. I'm sure you've lived through earthquakes. Well, then you should know for a fact that earthquakes will happen sooner for some people than they will for others, depending on how far they are from the actual epicenter of the earthquake. And this is exactly the same thing. The Earth is solid, but it will still allow compression waves to pass through it, and those compression waves are exactly what earthquakes are. The whole Earth doesn't immediately shake just because there's an earthquake in California.
Get out. I mean, come on. For reals? Get the hell out of here. This is our science. This is our truth. Science is going to stand up for this. All right, come on now. This has got to be some sort of joke. So if we move to the sun, and we've got someone on the Earth and someone on the sun, and they've got the same rod, and they both pull it, what happens? It would take 8 minutes.
No, it would take far, far longer than 8 minutes. Let's approach this from a slightly different angle. I don't know if you're a musical gentleman, but let's imagine, for instance, a drum. Do you know why we hear the sound of someone striking a drum? The reason we hear that is because there's a compression wave, not only in the air after it's been struck, but there's also a compression wave throughout the skin of the drum. Now, the skin of the drum is actually pulled taut, so that it's under tension. But we still experience a compression wave, even in that tense material. And it's that produces the sound. And because it's nice and tight, we end up with quite a well-defined compression, which is why you end up with a nice, sharp sound from a drum.
For them each to know the other one pulled the stick, so what happens in the meantime? The stick grows magically? This is our science?
Yeah, kind of. It doesn't actually grow, because you're talking about effectively the gaps between the subatomic particles, between the atoms, actually stretching out slightly. You know, there's no such thing as a purely rigid body. It just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist.
Okay, let's move on to Polaris. Now we've got a person on the Earth holding the rod with a person on Polaris. And the person on Polaris shoves the rod forward, and the person on Earth wouldn't know for 433 years. I mean, who doesn't disagree that this is some bullshit?
Jeran, have you ever been to a fireworks display? If you've ever been to a fireworks display, you'll know that when the rockets leave the ground, they go off with a nice thump, a nice hearty thump. But you'll also notice that you'll see the rocket move before you feel that thump. That thump that travels through the ground and up through your feet. I mean the actual thump through the ground, not the thump of through the air that you can hear, but the one that you can feel. You'll notice that the rocket will visually leave the ground before you feel that thump. That thump is the exact same compression wave that you are talking about giving a shove down that rod.
Is someone going to stand there and tell me that this is reality? There is no speed limit. If I push the stick, the person on the sun, or on the moon, or on Venus, or across a football field would feel it immediately. Well, let's look at good old Wikipedia, which says the speed of light in vacuum, commonly denoted as little c, is a universal physical constant important in many areas of physics. Its exact value is 299,792,458 meters per second. And they say this is exact because the unit of length, the meter, is defined from this constant. According to special relativity, c is the maximum speed at which all conventional matter, and hence all known forms of information in the universe, can travel. Simply isn't true. We can push the stick, and it would travel faster than the speed of light. It says for many practical purposes, light and other electromagnetic waves will appear to propagate instantaneously, but for long distances and very sensitive measurements, their finite speed has noticeable effects. In communicating with distant space probes, like Explorer 1 and Explorer 2, currently 13 billion miles from Earth, it could take minutes to hours for the message to get from Earth to the spacecraft or vice versa. The light seen from stars left many years ago, allowing the study of the history of the universe by looking at distant objects. And we see here that it's generally assumed that the fundamental constants such as c, or the speed of light, have the same value throughout space-time, meaning that they do not depend on location and do not vary with time. Down at the bottom we see, more generally, it is normally impossible for information or energy to travel faster than the speed of light. One argument for this follows from the counterintuitive implication of special relativity known as the relativity of simultaneity. If the spatial distance between two events, A and B, is greater than the time interval between them multiplied by the speed of light, then there are frames of reference in which A precedes B, others in which B precedes A, and others in which they are simultaneous. As a result, if something were traveling faster than c relative to an inertial frame of reference, it would be traveling backwards in time relative to another frame, and causality would be violated. In such a frame of reference, an effect could be observed before its cause. Such a violation of causality has never been recorded and would lead to paradoxes such as the tachyonic anti-telephone. Well, we just described that happening, and now we see why it doesn't work.
No, we haven't just described it happening. We've just described a thought experiment in which you perceive it being able to happen. It simply cannot happen. Jeran, your incredulity and your rather pathetic thoughts experiment is no basis for any kind of scientific-based hypothesis. Otherwise you would have come up with one. Now, I'm not going to go any further because all he's doing is babbling on about some bullshit that he believes supports his idea of a conspiracy. But so we're going to leave it there. And as I say, I really tried hard to get this one out again, nice and early. So thanks very much, guys, and I'll catch you later.